Question 61. Concerning the acceptance of gifts, the CFA Institute A. discourages customary business-related entertainment. B. encourages setting a strict value limit for acceptable gifts. Or C. encourages accepting gifts from parties other than clients. So looking at B and C, they both encourage two different types of things. B sounds good. Encourages setting a strict value limit for acceptable gifts. This is going to help enforce that independence and objectivity standard to make sure that we're not accepting anything that would be considered kind of unreasonable and would kind of make us more biased towards a certain asset manager, investment manager, or something like that. So I think we can go with B over C so far, since who you're accepting the gift from is less important than kind of the value of that gift, since that's what's going to impair our independence and objectivity. So looking at A and B here, the CFA Institute doesn't necessarily discourage business-related entertainment. The key here is those boundaries. So strict value limit is going to kind of help keep things in check, make sure that that independence and objectivity is kept sacred, so to speak. So we're going to go with answer B. Question 62. Hart Lewis, a fund manager at Maritime Incorporated, runs an emerging market fixed income hedge fund. The latest securities being evaluated by Lewis are African corporates. Due to the inefficiency of the corporate bond markets in which the issuers operate, security prices have not increased to reflect the early signs of recovery in the credit markets and economy. Lewis takes advantage of this information lag and purchases a significant number of corporate bonds for the fund. Bond prices immediately surge following the fund's purchase, leaving investors to question whether the fund has engaged in market manipulation. Has Lewis engaged in market manipulation? So we've got no, and then yes here, and then yes for different reasons. So yes, his activities have artificially distorted bond prices, or yes, he has engaged in information-based manipulation. So regarding information-based manipulation, there's an inefficiency in the market, and they have not, so security prices haven't changed to reflect the early signs of a recovery. This information is not fact. This is kind of still Hart Lewis's opinion. I mean, there's a lot of different data points out there that might say that there's early signs of recovery. So this is the view that he is taking, and he's taking advantage of that and purchasing a significant number of bonds. So he's basically has an investment thesis and then is acting on that investment thesis. So I don't think there's any information-based manipulation. Him doing this is making the market more efficient, really. So it's a good thing. And then for yes, his activities artificially distorted bond prices. They did cause a surge in the prices, but the key here is intention. So his intention was to act on his investment thesis. It wasn't to pump the market or take advantage of low volume bonds or anything like that to kind of drive up prices. Intention was acting on low bond prices that he thought should be higher, and buying the bonds that reflected that. And then the kind of surge in those prices is just kind of a byproduct of the investment thesis and how they acted on it, not anything intentional that they wanted to do to the market. Answer A. Question 63. Jason Lee is the senior portfolio manager at Motto Trust, an asset advisory firm. Lee has been invited to attend a tax conference sponsored by a tax advisory firm owned by his clients to enhance his tax management skills. The client has offered to fully pay for transportation to the conference, but Lee declines and instead opts for his own arrangement. Lee informs his supervisor of the conference invitation received before departing. After the conference, the tax advisory firm's senior manager invites Lee to an exclusive golf club, which he accepts. He informs his employer about the invitation upon returning to work the following day. Has Lee most likely violated any CFA Institute standards of professional conduct? So we've got no, yes, but only concerning attending the conference. We can rule that out right away. They offered to pay for transportation to the conference, but Lee opts and pays for his own arrangement or has his employer pay something else. So by doing that, there's certainly no violation. He's going there to enhance his tax management skills, It's run by his clients, but he's paying his own way, so that shouldn't impair his independence and objectivity. And then for C, yes, but only concerning accepting the golf club invitation. So this is tough and could be a bit of a gray area. They accept, after the conference, they're asking him to come to this golf club, which he accepts. And then he's informing his employer about it upon returning to work the next day. Ideally, he's getting approval from his employer beforehand, but maybe he didn't know about it. It sounds like it was kind of an impromptu invitation. An exclusive round of golf is certainly nice, but is that something that's going to kind of impair independence and objectivity? I'd probably lean more so towards no, and then he had full transparency and informed the employer right away the next day. So I think I would lean towards going with A. This is not a violation, but could understand if you chose C. Certainly a little bit of a gray area here. Answer A. Question 64. Which of these agents can most accurately claim compliance with GIPS? So we've got 1, 2, and 3 here, and then we need to determine which of these can. So either 1, 1, and 2, or 1, 2, and 3. And since agent 1 is on here, we could skip that and move along since they're in all 3 answers, but we'll look at all of them. Statement 1, investment management firms managing assets. Yes, these people can claim compliance with GIPS. The main thing with compliance with GIPS is having discretion and making investment decisions, essentially. So if you're making investment decisions and managing money for people, those are the people who are going to be using GIPS. 2, plan sponsors not managing assets. They cannot claim GIPS because they're not making investment decisions. Using that as our criteria, they cannot claim GIPS. And then C, vendors providing investment management software. They also won't be able to claim compliance. They are just enabling investment firms that are making investment decisions and managing assets to claim GIPS. They themselves cannot claim compliance. So we can say that only agent 1 will be able to claim compliance. And we'll go with answer A. Question 65. Dana Irk and Carl Scholes are CFA Level II candidates who have recently sat for the Level II exam and are awaiting their results. In a discussion between the 2 candidates, they each comment. Irk, this year the exam did not feature any questions on currency futures. So that's going to be a no-no. If that comes up in what we're actually answering here, we cannot talk about specifics on the exam, particularly topics. So we can't mention a currency futures when talking about the exam. Scholes, I found the quantitative technique session particularly difficult this year, as there were long calculations and many questions. Again, that's too specific. The first portion of this was okay. So if he said, yeah, I thought the quantitative was really hard, it's not very specific, it's vague, so that's okay. But then he keeps on talking here as long as there were many long calculations in the questions. It's too specific, you can't say that. I shouldn't say you can't say that. It would be a violation if you said that. Which candidate's statement is most likely in violation of the CFA Institute Standards of Professional Conduct? Okay, so talking through this, we already determined that they are both in violation since we can't talk about specific exam contents. So we've got Irk, Scholes, or both Irk and Scholes, and we'll go with answer C, both of them. Question 66. When managing pooled assets to a specific mandate, investment managers are, or must or need, A, are not governed by the suitability standard. We can rule that one out. They are governed by the suitability standard relative to their mandate. So for example, if the investment manager's mandate is large cap US stocks, they can't go out buying emerging market stocks or small cap stocks in Turkey or wherever else. So that's kind of how that suitability standard applies. Is it suitable for my mandate? B, must consider the suitability of an investment for clients. So this is where suitability is not going to be considered. The investment manager is beholden to this mandate. They don't need to consider all the suitability for all clients if they're putting out a fund or an ETF or whatever in this mandate. It's up to the client to kind of figure out whether it's suitable for them or not the investment manager. And then C, need not consider the suitability of an investment for clients. That sounds correct based on what we were just saying for B. They have to manage to the mandate. It's going to be up to the individual or their financial advisor or whoever else to kind of help them determine whether a fund or manager strategy is suitable for them. Answer C. Question 67. Which of the following actions is least likely considered a violation of the standard concerning loyalty to employers? So we've got least likely here. So 2 of these will be a violation and 1 will not. A, soliciting clients before the cessation of employment. So if I'm planning on leaving the firm and maybe starting my own firm, is soliciting clients while I'm still at that employer, is that a violation of loyalty to my employer? Yes. While you're still employed at that firm, you should not be soliciting clients. And a lot of times you may have a non-solicit after you leave the firm for some period of time. So you being loyal to that employer is, while you're still employed, is necessary. So you can't solicit clients before you leave. B, using a business plan generated for the employer to start a new business. Again, while you're employed by that employer, if you made this business plan for the employer, that's their property, not your own. And so you could potentially get permission from your employer to use that plan, but that would need to be a conversation had, not just taking the plan. C, applying specialized analytical skills gained at the previous employer in the new workplace. This would not be a violation. Skills are the skills and analytics and everything that you learned is in your brain, and they obviously can't extract that out of you when you go to a new employer. So this is perfectly fine. Answer C. Question 68. David Lynn, CFA, has been a portfolio manager for a large mutual fund company focusing on technology stocks. Recently, he accepted a position as the chief investment officer at a boutique investment firm. In his new role, David is responsible for setting the overall investment strategy, managing a diversified portfolio, and ensuring compliance with regulatory standards. To prepare for his new responsibilities, David takes advanced courses on portfolio diversification and risk management, subscribes to industry publications, and attends regulatory compliance workshops. With respect to his obligations under the CFA Code and Standards, David's actions A, are sufficient because he has addressed key aspects of portfolio management and regulatory compliance. B, are lacking as he has not focused on strategic decision-making and corporate governance training. Sounds like that could be our answer here. There's definitely some holes in kind of what David's doing to prepare for this. So he's going from portfolio manager to CIO. So in the portfolio manager role, he's primarily focused on all these investment things. So portfolio diversification, risk management, compliance to some extent. However, going into that CIO seat, he's going to be responsible for more things here. So like it says, overall investment strategy, probably some people management oriented responsibilities, and kind of that corporate governance, overseeing everything within that investment organization, not just running a fund. So B sounds like it could be our answer relative to A, at least, since it's probably not sufficient. And then C, meet the requirements because his participation in advanced courses and workshops demonstrates a commitment to competence. It does certainly demonstrate that, but I think the key here is kind of missing out on a couple of these key factors or job responsibilities that he'll have as the CIO, but didn't necessarily have as a portfolio manager. Answer B, question 69. To comply with the CFA Institute standards of professional conduct relating to duties to employers, members and candidates are most appropriately required to A, should not enter into an independent business while still employed, We can rule this out. This is going to be okay, but typically you'll want to get employer sign off first. But cannot do that is too hard of a rule. We can do that just kind of with some stipulations and employer approval. B, they are encouraged to recommend that their employers adopt and distribute a code of ethics. This sounds like something we should certainly be required and encouraging to be done. C, may obtain an assurance from a subordinate who has violated the code and standards that the wrongdoing will not recur. So we can rule this out. We should have a more disciplined process, which is kind of this adoption of code of ethics for such wrongdoings and what the discipline actions and whatnot should be for that. So out of these three, I think we can confidently go with B as our best answer. Question 70. Joyce and Monroe is an investment bank with a research division. Investment banker Ron Howard serves J&M and has recently arranged corporate financing for its client, Westdale Limited. Westdale will be using the financing to expand production to Australia. Several weeks later, J&M's chief research analyst issues a research report on Westdale, wherein he recommends Westdale's decision to expand into Australia is an excellent move because the potential market for its products should be vast. I am extremely confident that the company will see a remarkable and positive difference in its earnings over the coming months. Based on this, I recommend a strong buy. According to the Standards of Practice Handbook, the analyst's recommendation most likely violates the standard concerning A, misrepresentation. He is guaranteeing investment performance. There's not any guarantees here. He says he's extremely confident. The company will see a remarkable and positive earnings difference in his earnings over the coming months, but he doesn't say anything to the effect of they will see this. He says he's just confident that they will, and then based on that, he's recommending a buy. So there's no kind of guarantee of investment performance. He also doesn't give any numbers of like it'll increase earnings by 15% and the stock will go up by 15% or anything like that. B, disclosure of conflicts. He has not disclosed J&M's relationship with Westdale. This is certainly an issue. They are in, it says that Westdale was working with Ron Howard, who is at J&M. So there's that conflict there between them being investment banking and a research client. So that sounds like it could be our answer. I'm going to circle it for now. Let's make sure we can rule out C. C, communication with clients and prospects. He has failed to separate opinion from fact. This is pretty similar comments or alignment to answer A. He's giving his opinion. He's extremely confident that because of this market move, it's going to have a positive impact on earnings. There's no kind of guarantees or saying that it's going to have some factual effect or anything. We're expressing extreme confidence, but it's still, I think this would still be interpreted as an opinion. So for that reason, we'll stick with answer B.